think all of us are pretty much on the same page when it comes to the response from the professional political class and the media to this hostage rescue operation, which was an absolute triumph. A triumph accompanied by a lot of collateral damage, but that's hardly atypical in an operation conducted by a righteous military force that is operating in some of the worst conditions imaginable, designed to be the worst conditions imaginable, in very densely populated urban area, exfiltrating their civilians who are being housed among civilians in Palestinian territories in order to create the kind of conditions that Hamas exploits. We have a confession from Yahya Sinwar, if we ever needed one, that Hamas's leadership seeks collateral damage. It seeks the deaths of civilians. That advances their geopolitical, geostrategic objectives. Anybody who places the blame for Israel exfiltrating its civilians and in doing what Hamas wants by accidentally having civilians getting caught in the crossfire in these densely populated, pretty affluent areas, by the way. Another thing that people do is call these all refugee camps. These are pretty well-appointed refugee camps that have been there for generations now, that look a lot like cities to the untrained eye. Nevertheless, the fact that we have members of the administration even tisking Israel for this operation, even when it supported the operation materially, not just in giving Israel aid in terms of lethal arms, but also in intelligence sharing to culminate in this operation. And they're just sacrificing credit for it. They don't want credit for it. They would rather maintain this bizarre moral high ground in which they seem distant from this operation, in which they're materially involved. It is so frustrating because it makes absolutely no sense. Joe Biden wants to be on both
No, I
sides of
want to
this
say,
argument, and he's losing both
I
sides of
think
the
it was
argument.
you who made the point, and it's a point that it had not occurred to me, that the administration is trying to take credit for the mission at the same time condemn the mission. And by the administration, I don't mean Biden. I don't think he actually knows what's going on at this point. But they were giving intel to the Israelis to pull this off, and the details have now emerged this morning on they met 30 Hamas fighters along the way that were not expected there, and they had to kill them. And a lot of the so-called civilians were actually Hamas paramilitaries who'd been armed by Hamas who were shooting at the IDF, and they got killed. You know what my rule is? If Americans are held hostage, I hope Delta goes in or whoever has to go in, and I'm not going to worry about civilians who get in the way. Do you remember during the bin Laden operation how the SEALs were worried that a mob was forming at the end of the street? And they didn't really want to kill the mob, but they were prepared to in order to kill Osama. That wasn't even a hostage situation. That was a national security objective. If an American is held hostage and we have to kill a bunch of people to get him or her back, I'm all for that because they're assisting and abetting in a war crime.
Look, it's tragic, but the moral culpability does not lay on the defensive party here. The moral culpability is owed to the aggressor. The responsibility of the so-called sovereign in the Strip. Hamas fancies itself a sovereign government in the Strip. It doesn't act like one. It doesn't want the responsibilities of one. It certainly isn't obliged to behave in ways that we expect a civilized member of the international community to behave, and nobody holds them to these standards, not the least of whom being the people who are supposedly critics of Hamas, Israel's Western supporters. It is
No,
profoundly
we had the
frustrating.
mask slip a little bit more this morning. The details of the Hamas amendment to the offer that Joe Biden announced, which was itself an amendment of the Netanyahu offer, includes that guarantors of the Israeli immediate withdrawal will be Russia, China, and Turkey. What do you make of that, quote, amendment?
Well, I think it's a non-starter, and it's designed to be a non-starter. And according to the administration, which is making increasingly frustrated gestures in the direction of Hamas, that they understand that these are designed to prolong negotiations, because Hamas has two objectives. One, not to give back the prisoners, to prolong the war as long as possible, as long as it can hold out. The more it holds out, the more likely it believes it'll emerge from this war intact in some form. And two, to not get kicked out of Qatar. They don't want to get their leadership is ensconced in well-appointed apartments in Qatar. They don't want to be booted by the government in Doha, so they have to keep negotiating. And so the administration has committed itself to a course that will prolong the war by giving Hamas rhetorical support anytime Israel conducts a battlefield operation that makes them a little bit queasy. They give Sinwar exactly what he wants. And by prolonging the negotiations, they give Hamas the perception that it can negotiate itself out of this conflict. There's no there's no reconciling what Joe Biden is saying in both sides of his mouth when he announced a couple of weeks ago this peace plan, for example, that there will be a better day for the Palestinian people on the other side of Hamas's rule in the Strip. And at the same time, Hamas needs to negotiate itself out of existence. No one's going to do that. That doesn't make any sense.
They're not going to do it.
It's obscene.
I got to make sure I get your reaction to this, Noah. Politico has a story this morning. Headline: Biden's Israel policy may hasten Trump's rise, U.S. allies fear. First line: Biden and his aides have largely defended the Israeli offensive against Hamas militants in Gaza. That is, in my view, a lie. They have not largely defended Israel's offensive in Gaza. They've largely put a rope around it and tried to hold it back. The American media now sees everything through Trump Biden. I mean, legacy media. That's why podcasts are so vital in this era. Legacy media has a prism on everything that distorts the coverage of everything.
Talk about a Manichaean binary. That is exactly how they've approached the coverage of just about every ancillary, tangential issue relating to geo-domestic politics through the prism of the presidential race. I think that's absolutely accurate. But you could make, if I was being very charitable, you could make a colorable case that the administration has been stalwart in defense of Israeli interests in material terms and in intelligence sharing. You can also make it a perfectly valid case, one I would make, that the president's withdrawal of diplomatic cover from Israel in the United Nations represents a material deficit to Jerusalem, to say nothing of all the rhetorical opprobrium they rain down on Israel whenever it does anything that's excessively zealous in defense of its national interests. So they can't get credit for any of this. Israel's obsessive, monomaniacal critics will not give him credit for throwing Israel under the bus. Israel's supporters will not give him credit for giving Israel what it needs to defend itself in this war, even though they're a little uncomfortable with the prosecution of it. So they end up getting the worst of both worlds. The administration could make a victory out of this. They could be standing with the side they're on and saying to the people who are a little uncomfortable with it, look, the majority of the American people are on our side. War is messy. We want a better day for the Palestinian people. That happens only after Hamas is extirpated from the force as a political and military, from the strip as a political military force. That's it. That's all they need to say. That is a concession to reality. And there's a lot of very contemptible elements in the streets who don't want to hear it. And those people deserve to talk about people who deserve to be thrown under the bus. By sidling up to these people, this administration is exposing itself to a lot of deserved criticism about how scary things are getting, about how unstable things are getting. By giving these people all the oxygen they need to get in front of the cameras, to demonstrate that they have some relevance, some influence and pull over this administration, it's making people nervous, rightly so.